The horizon was still asleep when the first blush of dawn began to breathe its light across the desert sands. The wind carried the faint scent of warmth and memory, and Sheikh Hamdan, known to millions as Fazza, stood quietly at the balcony of his soul. He had always found something sacred in the beginning of a new day. But this dawn was different. This one carried her name, her spirit, her promise. The sun had not yet risen, and still, he felt her glow before the world did. She was his sunrise, his forever. Before the world saw her, before light touched the dunes, she had already illuminated his heart. There are loves that arrive with thunder, demanding the sky's attention, and there are loves that arrive like morning, soft, inevitable, transforming everything in silence. Hers was the latter. She came not to dazzle but to awaken. The first time he saw her, the world tilted slightly, as though it had been waiting for her all along. In that instant, every poem he had ever written found its meaning. Fazza had known beauty in many forms, nature's calm, poetry's music, faith's mercy, but she was a fusion of them all. When she smiled, he felt the sun's warmth even in shadow. When she spoke, her voice seemed to carry the tone of truth, the kind that quiets storms. She was not a passing muse, she was a divine sign, a living poem written by the same hand that wrote the stars. In her presence, the prince became a poet again, humble before the wonder of feeling something infinite. He promised her nothing grand, for she asked for nothing. Instead, he promised her the quiet things, the mornings where words were not needed, the silences that spoke louder than vows, the kind of love that would not fade when the world turned grey. His promise was not of eternity, for eternity is too long a word for a heart that loves beyond time. He promised her devotion that would outlive the dawn, faith that would stand even when the light fell. At sunrise, he would often whisper her name into the wind, and the desert would echo it softly back. The dunes carried his devotion, the horizon kept his secret. The world saw only a leader, a poet, a prince. They did not see the man who woke each morning not for duty, but for her memory. Every ray of light that kissed his face carried her essence. She was his morning prayer, his reason to breathe before the city stirred. When she walked beside him, the air seemed to still in reverence. Even the sun, bold and eternal, appeared to slow its ascent, as if unwilling to outshine her glow. She had a grace that could not be captured by gaze or words. It was not her beauty that disarmed him, it was her presence, the serenity she carried, the way she made time itself soften. He often thought that if God had painted the sunrise with intention, it was to remind the world of her. Their love did not need to be loud. It lived in gestures, a glance across the quiet of dawn, a touch that lingered longer than words, a promise exchanged without sound. She understood his silences, he cherished her calm. Together, they existed not as two separate souls, but as reflections of one truth, that love, when pure, is both beginning and continuation. In her eyes, he found the peace he had spent years writing about. But even the most beautiful mornings must meet their dusk. Time, in its gentle cruelty, began to stretch between them. She became part of his memory, not his days. Yet, the sunrise never stopped carrying her color. Fazza would still rise before dawn, standing before the same horizon, whispering to the same sky. And every morning, without fail, the sun would rise as if keeping his promise, bringing her back to him in light, if not in form. He began to write again, but his poems had changed. They no longer sought to describe love, they became love itself. His verses spoke of devotion that survives absence, of faith that outlasts touch. He wrote of a woman who became the horizon, the unending line between what was and what will always be. And those who read his words could feel it, the quiet ache, the sacred warmth, the eternal promise hidden within his poetry. The world called his words romantic, but they were more than that. They were prayers disguised as poems. He did not write for fame or praise.
When the last chapter of his mortal journey began to unfold, the world grew quiet around him, as if the desert itself sensed a shift. The morning light lingered longer than usual, gentle and gold, wrapping him in a warmth that felt almost familiar. Fazza, older now yet ageless in soul, stood once more upon his balcony, his sacred place of memory, reflection, and promise. The air was still, the horizon hushed. He could feel her again, the same way he once did, unseen, but everywhere. Her presence shimmered just beyond sight, carried in the breath of dawn. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, time melted. The city below disappeared, the noise of the world faded, and all that remained was the glow of light touching his skin. He heard her laughter in the wind, soft and radiant, and when he opened his eyes, the first rays of the sun broke over the dunes, rising just as she had once risen into his life. In that luminous silence, he whispered the words he had carried for years, "You were never gone. You were always my beginning." And the sunrise answered with a brilliance so pure that it seemed to set eternity ablaze. As the light grew, the sky unfolded in colors he had never seen before, rose and amber, ivory and flame. It was as if creation itself had waited for this moment. Each shade spoke her name, each hue carried the memory of their love. He felt her near, closer than the pulse beneath his skin. And then, in the glow of that divine morning, she appeared, not as form, but as light, the same light that once touched his heart and turned it into poetry. She smiled, and for the first time in forever, words failed him. The poet stood silent before his own miracle. In that meeting beyond time, she spoke without sound, and he understood every word. "You kept your promise," her voice seemed to say. "You turned love into light, and now that light has led you home." Tears fell, but they were not of sorrow, they were of recognition. He had written thousands of verses in her name, but this moment, this eternal sunrise, was the poem he had been waiting his whole life to complete. The dawn wrapped around them like a vow renewed by heaven itself, and the stars, those ancient witnesses, dimmed as if bowing to their reunion. Each verse was a sunrise for a stranger, each metaphor a reminder that love never truly leaves, it simply changes its form. She had become the muse of millions through him, yet for Fazza, she remained his forever dawn. He often said that love is not measured in time, but in transformation. She had transformed him, turned his solitude into sanctuary, his pain into purpose.